Welcome to episode 5 of Frags and Beer Radio. We're continuing our talk about getting young people interested in game development, even technology, computer sciences, and how the current gaming media especially might be detrimental, it might not be. I'm talking with young developers, young gamers, to get their opinions and see how it affects them, because I'm an old guy, so I've got my own views, but I definitely want to make sure that I'm finding out how the young people feel about it. So today I'm joined by Jordan Newton. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, we are very happy to have you. So you just recently graduated from college, correct?
No, I'm actually just a junior, so I'm going into my third year.
Ah, gotcha. Okay, so I misread that. My bad.
Nope,
But you are studying technology, specifically computer sciences, more toward the game and development bent. But you've also got a background in web development, correct?
Yep, I am a computer science major, but my concentration is in game development. So my senior electives are a bit more tied into game development as opposed to general computer science.
Awesome. And what got you specifically interested when you were younger, or at what point, and what got you interested in gaming and then moving into actually making games?
So I actually cannot remember a time that I wasn't into gaming. My dad has always been a huge gamer, and being a little girl, always want to be, daddy's girl. I always tried to play the same games he did. I remember being like 4 or 5 years old, and he was really big into EverQuest at the time. Mm-hmm. He let me make a character, and I remember getting to like level 3 and thinking it was the biggest accomplishment I had ever done in my life. Mm-hmm. Like for a 4-year-old, that was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And then he embraced it. He loved having a kid he could play video games with. So I've always been a PC gamer just because he was. Other than that, my first console was probably, it was a PS1, and then I had all the Game Boys.
Cool.
And at one point I was just decided I wanted to make video games, and it was probably around when I was maybe 6 or so, and I don't think it ever went away.
Good. And when you did do that, obviously your father was very supportive. Did you run into friends or teachers at school or anybody when you were younger that might have told you that wasn't a good idea, or there might be other things more attuned to, I guess, how do you say, things that might be better for you because you're a girl? Did you ever run into that?
Not really from adult figures, no. More like from other kids. Mm-hmm. So I think middle school was when we had like the computer technology elective or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's basic HTML and
right.
general computing stuff. I was one of the only girls in the class. It was a big class too. Mm-hmm. And I think that was when I was like, this is really weird, because up until that point I hadn't really realized that it wasn't a thing that girls weren't necessarily encouraged to go into. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to high school, I went to a specific technology high school. It was a program for, you had to apply to get in, Mm-hmm. And rather than take general electives, we took programming classes and web design classes and just all sorts of, more tech classes as opposed to general boring electives.
Awesome.
We had maybe a 25% female to male ratio. And that was when I kind of really realized, I was like, oh yeah, there's not as many of us as I thought. And that's when I was more shown that girls aren't necessarily encouraged. They're not really discouraged so much as just not encouraged.
Okay, that's interesting that you put it that way, because that's kind of what I'm trying to seek and kind of trying to counter the idea that girls are discouraged from it, because I haven't seen it, but obviously I'm not a girl, and yeah. but I grew up years ago when I went through school. It was very similar when I took keyboarding classes. I mean, we're talking when I went through school, we learned computer stuff on an Apple IIc.
Oh yeah.
But I noticed it too. But I didn't notice anybody saying, "Well, you can't do that because you're a girl." It was more like you said, that it just wasn't one of those things where people said you can do this, and I want to make sure that, I guess this will lead into a further topic, but I think that ties into you. I noticed you were involved in an Aspire IT Girls Computing Camp.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, and did you notice, since you've gone through school and you've gotten older and gotten through that, have you noticed more interest from young girls by going through these kind of support camps and helping young people get interested in technology?
So I've seen all kinds of girls come through my camps. The area where I taught it in, we had, pretty interesting economic disparity between the really wealthy and the really poor. Mm-hmm. And it also, that depends on computer science and technology. Interest is also related to, where, your economic standpoint.
Right.
But I taught the camp, and there were other people teaching camps of also, like STEM camps, in the school. So it was, Aspire IT is a program through NCWIT, National Center for Women in Information Technology, mm-hmm. where you can apply for funding from various global, computer science powerhouses. I think ours was sponsored by Microsoft in part.
Okay.
So mine was an Aspire IT camp. We also had other students teaching electrical engineering camp, just a basic physics camp. Mm-hmm. There was one on cybersecurity.
Okay.
So mine was specifically on game development because that's what I like. I love teaching it. The girls that took my class really enjoyed it. There was a couple of the really, into games. Mm-hmm. They loved talking to me about games. They loved being able to make their own games. Then you had the other girls that their parents put them in the camp, and you could tell that it wasn't necessarily something they were super interested in at first.
Yeah.
But by the end, they were actually pretty interested in it. So I think that kind of ties in as they're not necessarily exposed to it or encouraged to do it. And when they do get a pretty fun introduction to it, it's something that they realize that, maybe this is something that I should look into.
Yeah. As a parent, that's something that, kids don't necessarily want to accept that their parents sometimes can help them by seeing their interests and not necessarily knowing what might help the kid along their lines of their interests, but they don't want to do it because mom and dad said sometimes.
Oh yeah.
But that that's an interesting way of putting it, as far as that there has to be interest, obviously, and I see a lot of the media pushes the idea that companies need to hire more women, companies need to hire more minorities, and that'll solve the problem. And I wonder, and I work in technology, I work in a different facet of computer development, and not so much games, but something different. And I noticed that it's not so much, these companies want to, Google, Microsoft, my company, they want to hire more women, more minorities that are qualified for the jobs, but is the hiring pool, is that the problem? Is it the problem that the companies don't want to hire it, or is the problem the hiring pool, and we just don't have enough?
It's definitely the hiring pool. I've been pampered by a lot of tech companies. I just got back from a VMware trip, all expenses paid by them. Mm-hmm. Companies desperately want to hire more unrepresented groups, and there are multiple reasons for that besides just making them look good. Mm-hmm. You get different thinking,
right.
Mind views. So when you have a workforce that is made up of just one majority demographic, you run the risk of stagnation because you're not bringing in unorthodox or just different
right.
mind points.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I do think it's the hiring pool is just not. It's like there aren't enough minorities for companies to hire at the moment, and right. I definitely just don't agree with the idea that we should be hiring people based on their skin color or their gender just because that's who they are as opposed to their skill. Mm-hmm. I'm very much into the meritocracy. Everything should be based on your own work and ethic as opposed to just who you happen to be born as.
Right.
So I think companies are also a bit impatient now, and that's from the media pressuring them to hire these groups that just aren't there at the moment.
Right.
So there's this pressure for companies to hire these people that aren't there, when I think in a couple, maybe even just 5 years, we'll have a much more diverse pool of applicants, because a lot of these programs that do target young minorities only just got started very recently.
Right.
So a lot of these kids haven't even got into college yet, much alone just graduated from college. So
Right.
I think if we just wait a little bit longer, we'll see some successes from these programs, like the ones I taught. We'll see more girls choosing computer science, because now there's a lot more programs telling them that computer science is totally a thing that they can do.
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
we just need to wait a little bit longer. Stop
agree.
forcing it.
I've said that before. I think impatience is part of the problem. There is a lot of changes that need to happen in the world, and a lot of things that need to be made better, but I do think there's a lot of people out there that want it better now, and they don't understand that human beings as a whole and as by design don't change very quickly, and there's a whole vast array of reasons why we don't change, and biologists and archaeologists and all the people that study human history can tell us why much better than they're much more educated than I am. But there's a myriad of reasons why we don't change very quickly, and I think there's a lot of people that have very good intent. They want to do good things. The problem is they want those good things to happen right now, and they just can't give the human element time to catch up to these changes. So that, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So that, I guess, moves into, we've talked about the media kind of being the culprit. Do you think that while the media on one hand says we need more women and minorities in STEM, as a general thing, let's just broaden it out to STEM. We need more women and minorities in STEM, but then on the other hand, they do nothing but sensationalize these isolated incidents of women who might be affected by something negative online or harassment online, and blow that into an entire umbrella of, look how awful STEM is for women, look how sexist it is. Do you think they're countering their own objective by scaring people?
Yes. They are completely taking this problem, blowing it out of proportion, and creating a self-prophesizing problem where we started out, the first stories started coming out. And I was like, oh, these are kind of terrible. But most people accepted them as isolated incidents. And then it grew into this whole genre of media of, let's talk about how gross and sexist and misogynist the STEM fields overall are. And now we have no reason for little girls to even want to consider going into a field that supposedly is doing everything it can to keep them out of it.
Right.
I've talked to parents before about, getting girls interested in these programs, or just, telling them that, oh, sign your girl up for one class. If she doesn't like it, she doesn't like it. But you never know unless she tries. I've had parents straight up tell me, no, I don't want my daughter going into those fields. I've seen how horrible they are. And I have to be like, you don't want your daughter to become a computer scientist? And they're like, no, I don't want my daughter to be associated or, treated badly in a field. And that's just inane. So it's not only affecting girls' perception of the field, but it's also parents. And parents are, what get kids the opportunities to do these things in the first place.
Definitely. I think that's a very good point that I haven't touched on before doing this, and it reminds me of a story a few years ago. Cosplay suffers from some of the same, and now this is not a technology field, but it suffers from some of the same misconceptions. And I remember an article that came out, and it covered the cosplay deviants, which they have their own thing, and they can go do their own thing. But the problem was, the article was written by a mother whose young daughter wanted to become a cosplayer, and the mother did her research. This young girl was, I want to say at the time, 11 or 12 years old. So this mother, of course, being a responsible parent, does her research into what is cosplay. She has no idea. And she stumbles on this cosplay deviant site, and automatically says, well, why would I want my little girl doing something like this? Now, of course, she could have done more research and found out all cosplay is not like that. But when the media does not hold up good examples either. When the media is only holding up the bad examples, yeah, you've got parents who are being good parents, doing the research, and saying, well, I don't want my kid exposed to that. I don't want my girl to become a gamer and start playing video games. You know, she wants a PS4, but I hear about how awful boys are online, and I don't want my little girl exposed to that. I mean, it's a very good point that good, responsible parents are going to wind up turning their children away from these things early on in their interest based on doing good research on bad information.
And that's just too true. Oh, you know, people that are trying to, you know, raise their kids right, they see this, and especially when all of the mainstream media outlets, the people that you go to first to check the news, you know, the average person will go and check them. When they're presenting nothing but just a negative viewpoint on something that is completely overblown, most people don't take the time to do extra research beyond just what the first page of Google presents. And that's, you know, that's just people.
Right.
So they're going to see this and they're going to be like, why would I want to willingly expose my daughter to something that could, you know, turn against them or hurt them?
Right.
It is a real problem. So when I was teaching my game design camp, I had, I think it was 2 girls from separate families. They were in a different camp. And they asked me about my camp. And they're like, well, I really wanted to do your camp, but mom or dad didn't let me. So they put me in this camp instead. And I got multiple different answers. One of them was that, oh, games are for boys, so they didn't want me to going into it. And that one was just, oh, that one made me really angry. And the other was just like, you know, like, oh, getting into it will, you know, that's not something that little girls do because the boys will be mean to you if you do that. It's like, that's just what the parents heard. It's not true. And you're creating the problem yourself. Like, you're perpetuating the problem by doing this.
Absolutely.
It's very frustrating.
I can see that because as you stated, a diversity of ideas only helps it only makes companies better, but it also helps. I mean, obviously you got to struggle. Nobody's denying that there are struggles for women in
there
technology.
are definitely problems. It's just not as bad as they make it out to be.
Right. And the only way you're going to get those problems to go away or become less of a problem is more exposure to these diversity of ideas. But if you can't get more people with diverse ideas into these positions, you're not exposing the source of the problem to, you know, it's that circle that just will not solve itself. And, you know, I talked to one of my first interviews was with a young game developer who just graduated, and she was getting started as an independent developer, and she had never heard of, and I mean, this is by far not a judge of anybody who knows anything about gaming, but she'd never heard of Roberta Williams. And a lot of young people, I can understand a lot of people may not have heard of Roberta Williams, but she's the woman that started Sierra.
Yeah, I love them. The Sierra duo, dynamic duo, excellent models.
And so why isn't the media using these as examples? Why doesn't our games media put out articles about the top 10 women? I mean, I read this article from a mainstream source, not from a gaming source, but I read an article about the top 10 women in gaming. CEOs, COOs, creators, not just a developer or a sound studio tech. I'm talking like top tier women in game development. All of them were big names in the industry, but the thing is this article was buried so far down in a search for women in gaming under all of these articles about how dangerous it is for women in gaming. And I'm thinking, how far does a young woman who might have an interest in this have to go before she starts seeing good examples, good representation of what she wants to do? And that's kind of what got me onto this. It was so frustrating to constantly be told how awful my hobby is, you know, because of my gender, making it so awful, and then going to look and seeing that the women who actually, the women who are doing it, yourself and the other women I've talked to who are actually in the industry, are saying that's just not so. And then I think, well, the media, these people writing these articles, they're not game developers. They're not in the industry. They're looking at it from the outside, and they're trying to obviously sell clicks. And obviously bad news sells better than good news. But I guess that's kind of why I'm doing this. It's just so irritating to me.
It
you
is.
know?
No, it's so frustrating because we have all these people on the outside that think they know what it's like because of a few anecdotal stories, and because of that, they completely erase history and tons of successful stories from people that could be inspirational role models if you put them out there and showed them off. So we have all these girls that have pretty much no role models because all we do is focus on the horror stories and the bad. So one of my electives was a game history class. It was really fun. The book we used was called Replay, The History of Video Games by Tristan Donovan. Totally recommend it. Excellent read.
I need to get it. I've heard of it. I have not picked it up yet.
It's very informative, but also very entertaining. I totally recommend it. And they talk a lot about influential women in games from the history of when games got started.
Good.
We don't hear about these people talked about at all. You don't hear about, Sierra was founded by just as much a woman as a guy. It was a duo that worked together.
Right.
And then there's just, even today, I think it's because the women that are successful in the field are too busy being successful in the field and caring about their job than they are about pointless drama.
Right. Well, there's only one way to get ahead, and that's to focus on your job. You're right.
So, if you have someone that is so wrapped up in, being a woman in tech as opposed to being a programmer, then they're probably not very good at their job, one. And two, that's probably not the type of role model you want to give, little kids anyways. So I think, and people forget about a lot of these successful women. One of the biggest ones that no one really talks about is 343 Studios. And then every time E3 rolls around, they're like, oh yeah, it's a woman. And like, why aren't we talking about her more often? It's because she's probably busy working and doesn't want to be in the field too much.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate that our media is so focused on sensationalizing, and unfortunately that's just as much our fault as it anybody else's. We see a headline that looks interesting about something really dramatic and we click on it, and that perpetuates the problem. Instead of shunning that kind of news, we consume it like rabid animals, and then that's what they keep giving us. They keep just giving us all these terrible examples. Unfortunately, that's human nature, and I think the one way to get away from it is to start pushing more of the good stories. But
so back on pushing the good stories, there's Microsoft has actually started to do this. They have, it's called Big Dream Movement. You can go to bigdreammovement.com, where they made a documentary about successful women in tech, and they don't focus on the bad. It's supposed to be purely like, yes, this is good, this is awesome, and it only talks about the good stuff, pretty much. And I think that's what we really need to start focusing on. It's because, like I said, when we focus on the bad, we're not giving girls a reason to want to go into this field. When you're trying to sell a house, do you focus on only the negative parts of it?
Right.
Yeah. We are trying to sell an industry to potential buyers, and we're only telling them about how much it sucks rather than how awesome it is and what they could do with it. Right.
Absolutely agree. Good. I wrote that down. I will definitely take a look at that because that does sound like something that needs to be shared out more and spread around more. And unfortunately, on the flip side of that, we run into an image reminded me of this, of one of the programmers that worked on the moon landing. One of the programmers was a woman, and they have a picture of her online. It went around on Twitter for a while.
Is it the one where they're standing next to the big stack of
all the paper? Like how that was all written.
So inspirational.
Yeah, but one of the responses that was so frustrating was, and this is, I think, is part of the issue too, was there was a lot of response to that. It says, well, as soon as they start celebrating the men who programmed for the moon landing, I'll care. And I thought, it doesn't have to be, on both sides of the extreme, it does not have to be one or the other. Here is an awesome programmer who was probably the only woman on that team standing next to a stack of paper that's as tall as her.
And
there are so many
true.
Yeah, there's so many good points in that picture. Hey, look what it took to program something like that back then, on a computer that's no better than today's average calculator. but also like one of the only women in the team. But also look that the industry, the STEM field, has not been a men's only club.
No, it's not. It's never has been.
No, I mean, it's been a lot of men. It's been male dominated. Those are both true statements. But to say that women have never had a place in technology is completely false. And here is a picture to prove it. And I think that was the point. And a lot of people just said, well, why are we celebrating this? Why can't we evenly celebrate men? Well, we did evenly celebrate men on the moon landing when we showed a picture of the control center and the 3 men that landed on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be an even balance constantly. It doesn't have to be, look, here's one man and here's one woman who are successful at something. Sometimes we can say, look at this successful woman. But then you also have the media who turns on the other extreme of that and says, look at all the terrible things that happen to women. So it's just such a frustrating thing to try to find a balance. So like this Microsoft thing, I would share the heck out of this, and I will share the heck out of this, but I know there will be responses like, well, why is there a documentary about only women in technology? Where are the men? And it's, that's kind of the frustrating flip side to this discussion, unfortunately.
No, there'll always be, blowback about it. I've gotten crap for being, well, why do you teach only girls at camp? But one of the reasons for that is because parents are more likely to sign their girls up for computing camps if it's only girls.
Mm-hmm.
And the other answer is I've taught co-ed camps before. This was just a specific one for girls. Right. There will always be programs targeting specific demographics.
Yeah.
If you're one that you're interested isn't necessarily for you, I'm pretty sure you can find another one.
Right.
That does the exact same thing.
Yes.
And the thing is, a lot of this is just a band-aid to fix this until things get better.
Right.
So these girls-only camps probably won't be around for forever until the field gets more diverse. Then we won't need them anymore, and they'll probably go away.
Right.
It's just a thing to help, get to where we want to be. And then once everything is, peachy, as diverse as all of the, diversity managers want it to be, then we'll be fine. And then we'll go back to how things were.
Right. And to add to that, like you said before, diversity to the extent that people want to be. You can't force women who aren't interested in tech to get into tech.
No,
you can't. Yeah, you can't force minorities who aren't interested in being doctors. You can't force them to be. So there does have to be an interest in there, and it may always be skewed toward men. I mean, let's take gaming as an example. I know everybody lauds the what is it, 49% of gamers are women now. But when you get far more specific, you realize that the hardcore gamers is what they're called. The gamers who play on PCs or consoles exclusively, or that don't play the mobile games. When you start breaking those numbers down, it's a lot smaller demographic, and it's not because not everybody. I'm sorry. A few people will tell you that it's because the boys' club keeps them out, which isn't true, because then the percentage would be 0. If men were keeping women out of being gamers, the percentage of female hardcore gamers would be 0. So clearly that's not a factual statement, but it does show that there's not as much interest. And I tweeted out a picture not too long ago because I've seen a lot of people say that the marketing has always been for boys, which drives me absolutely bonkers, because I see these 20 and 21-year-old young journalists in quotes putting out this idea that marketing for gaming has always been for boys. Now, I grew up in the Atari era. I remember when Atari was brand new, and I remember ads, and I found multiples, but I found one just recently. It was an ad for an arcade system that arcades could get that allowed bystanders to watch. What it was basically a TV that sat on top of the arcade, so that people could stand back and watch what the player was seeing. And now in this ad, there were 3 arcades. There were a lot more men in the picture, but the funny thing is all 3 players was a young girl, a young boy, and what I'm guessing was a mother based on her dress and her hairstyle. So out of the 3 gaming systems, 2 of the players were women. So you get this idea of people saying that the marketing was toward boys, and it wasn't. The first Nintendo ad that showed the Nintendo system had a brother and sister playing while the mother and father watched. The first computer ads that came out showed both men and women using them. Now, granted, for different jobs, because at the time, more women were secretaries, accountants, those kinds of things. So they showed the women doing those kind of jobs in front of a computer, and they showed the men doing their type of jobs. So the idea that the marketing created this boys club is completely false.
No, it totally is. In that game history class, we used to watch advertisements. We watched some for the ColecoVision, the Magnavox Odyssey, and they were as gender neutral as they could possibly be.
Right.
They weren't overly feminine. They weren't overly masculine. It was just, here's a game system. Here's some kids playing the game.
Right.
You know, look how awesome this is. So I think this whole, you know, like, masculine association with video games is very new. New as in, you know, like past 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And I there's some interesting facts that I was trying to, like, figure out why this happened.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of stuff that happened around that time period that made, changed the public perception of what computer science and just any techie programming video game things were around the time. So, in 1985, the number of computer science majors was actually 40% women.
Wow.
And that's not tooted a lot. It was almost 50% in 1985. As of 2011, it was like it was 18%. So it's gone down a lot. So I was curious, like, okay, what's made it gone down? I read this interesting paper that I can't remember who wrote it. I have all of the facts and all of the citations stored away somewhere on my computer. But around the same time, the movies War Games, Revenge of the Nerds, and Weird Science came out.
Oh, yeah.
And they all had the same stereotype of geeky male programmer interested in video games, you know, technology. And it was always, you know, like a white male, young guy of abnormal body weight that's either, you know, super fat or super thin.
Right.
And every year from then on, when that stereotype started being perpetuated more and more, the amount of women doing computer science also decreased. So I know correlation does not automatically mean causation or whatever.
Right.
But it's an interesting thing to look at to see how the media perpetuated this image of what your stereotypical, you know, programmer would look like and what effect it's had on how women view the field.
That is interesting, and I guess I had thought about that kind of along those lines, but I'd never looked so specifically into it. But that does make a lot of sense, because it, you know, being the generation I grew up in, when I was a young gamer, we didn't care. We had no preconceived notion that it was boys that played video games, and we also didn't think that it was nerds and geeks that played video games. I didn't come across that perception until I got into junior high and high school, when I started to be, you know, bullied and picked on because I wore glasses and I was a nerd and I liked video games and role-playing games.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's so that's interesting to see, because it's probably about the same time that the media's vision or the media's image of geeks and nerds did kind of come out like that, you know. But then I guess when the media finally left that behind and started making it quote unquote cool to be a nerd, then of course we had the gaming media that just never got on board with that. You know, they just seem to push the same tired old stereotype that we have been trying to crawl out from under for the last probably 20 years now.
And it's almost criminal how they do that. I mean, you look at, you know, just if you just got a couple, maybe 100 random people off the street, I'm pretty sure a good amount of them would say that they play video games. And the amount of how much they prescribe to that, you know, stereotypical appearance of a gamer would probably only be like a handful of them. So almost everyone plays video games these days,
right.
You know. And, you know, mobile games are really big out there, too, but I'm talking about, you know, console and PC games. Right. And I think especially Nintendo has been helping out a lot with that, making, you know, the family-friendly Wii U, whatever.
Right.
So we have all of these kids and all of these people that play video games, but they don't fit into the stereotype anymore. Yet
Mm-hmm.
somehow we're spreading that the stereotype is still a thing.
Right. Yeah. The fat white kid living in his parents' basement eating Doritos.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that's
get the Mountain Dew.
yeah, it's unfortunate that that's still the idea that's being pushed out there. So obviously, I guess we can surmise from this that you think that education and pre-education level is where the solution is going to come from, getting
Yes.
more young people interested, um, and then getting the media to get off this constant sensationalization of all of these awful things. Obviously it needs to be reported on if something bad happens, but this constant inundation of look how terrible gaming is needs to stop.
Yeah, so you got to reach the kids before the media gets to them,
Mm-hmm.
which is getting increasingly difficult these
Yeah.
days. My God. So elementary and middle school is what I normally target. Because these are young kids.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't been corrupted by the pessimism of the world yet. Everything about life is exciting to them.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta show them what computer science really is, what computing, programming, web design, anything you could do on a computer really is before the media starts telling them like all these lies about how terrible it is, especially young girls. So, like I said, I grew up always encouraged to do, video games, computers by my family. And then it wasn't until that I really got into like middle school that I realized that that wasn't normal.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we get, the elementary school girls, show them how great it is, what they could do with it, how programming can be used for like social problems and humanitarian
Mm-hmm.
problems, just beyond this concept that computer science is programming just software all day, but not necessarily the applications of that software can be used to save lives everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I think the media needs to focus on is that computer science is a tool to save pretty much anything,
Oh, absolutely.
fix the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
Yeah. So we need to get to the kids first. And that sounds terrible when I say it that way. We need to get to the kids first before the media
Yeah.
does.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's the two-sided coin of teaching kids before they know any better. How do you know you're teaching them the right thing before they know any better? And everybody goes through that. Obviously, religious folks want to get to the kids early. Political folks want to get to the kids early. But you're right. We're going to be moving into an era, and I already see it where I work. And I'm not going to get too specific because of all the obvious dangers out there of telling people where you work. But where I work, we deal with simulators, which in essence, the way we make them, they're games. But they're more technical and they're a lot more specific. But we deal in simulators that work with heavy machinery, but also with we're getting into the medical field and things like that. And these are essentially programming. They are at their core video games, but these are going to go on to train doctors how to do surgery, and they go to train people how to build stuff, or in some cases excavate. I mean, when you've got to send a bunch of heavy machinery operators to a place that's been hit by a typhoon, this kind of training saves lives. It helps people rebuild from horrible events. And we're going to be moving into an era where that becomes more and more important. And yeah, if we don't get more people involved in this, boys, girls, everybody, we're going to have less people to fill those roles that are going to be desperately needed to get these kind of technological advances out into the world to help people.
So I'm a huge proponent for using video games for educational purposes. Gamification is a powerful tool that we need to learn how to harness and fast in order to fix a lot of the problems that our education system is just not helping kids these days. Right. Jane McGonigal is a really excellent person to listen to for TED Talks. I actually I heard her do a talk live. She's phenomenal. She's really into using video games, specifically video games, to save the world. So, she's very much an idealist, but if you read her with a bit, bit grounded in reality, a lot of what she says is very inspirational and opens up a lot of doors to how people out that perceive video games as a useless, mindless, entertainment thing
Mm-hmm.
can be used to fix everything. I recommend her book, Reality is Broken. I've read it. It's very good. And just her TED Talk is also really good. But also just outside of video games and computer science in general, like I said, there's this perception that it's you're going into computer science, you're going to sit behind a desk and program all day, and what you're doing is only going to benefit, your company. But that's just not true. Computer science has so many applications for fixing so many different problems that we have across the world and multiple societies. So one of my favorite companies is Palantir. Besides just being super nerdy, the name Palantir itself is a reference to Lord of the Rings. They're a very great company. I went to a demo where they were showing off the humanitarian efforts of how they can apply their software to solve problems. Palantir is a very cool company. They don't believe in giving money, like throwing money at problems. What they do is they give their software to companies and nonprofits that are trying to change the world for the better. They give them their software and they give them their experts to show them how to best use their software and to best do what they want to accomplish. And I think that's just a great thing. They hit so many different areas, but not a lot of people know who they are because they're mostly known for doing stuff with defense and counterterrorism, which is not civilian.
Right.
Civilian software. But I think it was, their software platform, Gotham, is a really cool way to organize data that companies give them. So they do stuff with human trafficking in the United States where I can't remember what specific organization they worked with, but they were able to give them and customize the Gotham platform to them specifically how they wanted. And they're able to save like so many people, so many young women and migrant workers that are being trafficked in the United States here, home territory.
Right.
This stuff is happening, and they're able to do a considerable amount of work with it. They've also shown that in the Mediterranean, they were able to use this software to stop a boatload of automatic weapons and explosives from being transported to Syria, which saved, God knows how many lives. Right. So there's all of these applications for computer science to do actual real world good that no one focuses on anymore. Right. And I think if we told specifically little girls, little girls want to go into jobs that help people. That's just, how we raise girls these days. Right. I want to be a doctor because I want to save people. Yeah. I want to be a vet because I want to help animals. Well, we need to show that computer science, you're not just helping on a case-by-case basis. You're, helping people, whose job specifically is to help people do their job better, which can have an untold amount of positive effect in whatever you want it to do.
Absolutely. And I like that like you said, they give, instead of giving money to a problem, they give tools. And that's been sometimes a derided proverb, but the whole teach a man to fish principle.
Oh yeah.
You can't just keep giving money to problems when sometimes they can't use that money. They can't always use that money to buy the tools they need. So you give them the tools they need as opposed to money. I think that's really good. Very cool. So yeah, I'm taking notes because there's a few things I'm going to look into these books. I'm very interested. I'm a huge reader, so I will definitely be looking into those.
Oh yeah.
So what's for your future? You want to get into game development, but you're also focusing on the education aspect of game development. What is, I guess, some of the quote-unquote softball questions? What would be like your dream franchise to work on? If you were to get with any company you could pick and work on any game franchise that you wanted, what would it be?
So my favorite game, unfortunately, will probably never have another title in it. My favorite game is Okami.
Okay.
My favorite game designer is Hideki Kamiya. I love him to death. I love all of his
Yeah.
games. But unfortunately, Okami is caught in corporate loophole with not Kotaku. Yeah, Capcom.
Okay.
So that'll probably never happen. I like working for small companies. I work at a startup right now. I love it.
Cool.
I feel more held to my obligations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm just as much celebrated for my successes as I am condemned for my mess
Right.
ups. So I would like, to make my own games, but I'm a realist. I know that might not ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think so long as I just go to a company that has, a good perception on what gamers what they are, what they want.
Right.
Like CD Projekt Red is awesome. I love them. I feel like they're very grounded
Mm-hmm.
and they have a really good perception on their customers. So I don't know any specific game company. CD Projekt Red, Firaxis is cool.
Yeah.
They're at least close to me.
But in general,
Play-
somewhere where your work is appreciated.
Yes, I want to feel appreciated.
Good.
I don't think I could ever really work at a huge company where I feel like just another person that works there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like working at small companies a lot.
Very cool. All right, well, we've pushed it to 45 minutes, which is a little longer, but it's good because I think there was an awesome discussion and you've shared a lot of great information with me and the listeners. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. I love talking about this stuff. I feel like I have a unique background when it comes to talking about these things. So
Yeah,
always happy to share.
absolutely. And yeah, I think it's going to help. Hopefully, I mean, that's my goal is to hopefully help in any little way I can. So I think this will move that notch a little closer to the help column. So thank you so much. And we will definitely chat again, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd love to come back.
All right. We are going to close out now, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.